Okay, we're going to get started here. Thank you all for weathering the storm, weathering the snow, and making it here this afternoon. Very excited to be here today, joined by our esteemed legislators. Representative Scott Slater is the primary sponsor of House Bill 5777, the Marijuana Regulation, Control and Taxation Act. Representative Edith Agello is also joining us today. She's put in a lot of work. She's been a champion for this issue for many years, so thank you, Representative Agello, for being here today. And of course, Chairman Miller, Josh Miller, is the Senate sponsor of the Marijuana Regulation, Control and Taxation Act. So we're going to hear a few comments from them in just a second about why they're introducing this legislation and why we think this is the year to pass it. So that's going to be our takeaway message, is we think this is the right year to enact this legislation and get the ball rolling. My name is Jared Moffitt. I'm the director of Regulate Rhode Island. Regulate Rhode Island is a coalition of community leaders and organizations across the state that believe marijuana prohibition is a failed policy, and we would rather replace that with a system to regulate and tax marijuana similar to alcohol. So we have over 20 organizations that are part of our coalition, and essentially we all are united in our belief that whether marijuana is legal or illegal, folks are going to get their hands on it. People are going to buy, sell, and use marijuana whether we prohibit it or whether we make it legal. So the question is not whether we want marijuana in society or not, but how we're going to regulate it, how we're going to control it. And the choice is clear. We have, on the one hand, a criminal market that makes people less safe because the product isn't labeled, because it happens in an illegal underground market, or we can have a regulated system with licensed businesses that pay taxes, obey the law, and only sell to adults 21 and older. So we believe that's the real choice here, and our coalition believes this is the year that we should be moving forward with this. So with that, I want to just first welcome Representative Scott Slater to come up and share his comments about the bill.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you all for being here today. In particular, I really would like to thank my co-sponsors here too, Representative Edith Agello, who's done amazing work on this bill and laid some great groundwork with a lot of legislators educating them on this issue. And thank you for all your advocacy on this. And co-sponsor of this legislation, Senator Miller, the sponsor on the Senate side, Senator Miller. So thank you for all the work you guys have put in for many years on this issue. This is an important news conference today. It is a great privilege to stand here today as a sponsor of House Bill 5777, the Marijuana Regulation Control, the Taxation Act, a well-researched, well-crafted piece of legislation. As many of you know, my late father, Tom C. Slater, championed the medical marijuana law that passed in 2006, and I am proud to continue the legacy of sensible marijuana policy reform. This bill would end decades-old policy of prohibition in the production and sale of marijuana to adults 21 and older. It would remove penalties for adults who possess 1 ounce or less of marijuana and establish a system of license, taxes, and regulations to govern legitimate marijuana businesses. Specifically, the bill outlines rules for cultivators, retail businesses.
Excuse me.
The BIMO equal pay law, the N-word, Voting Rights Protection Act, that's a derogatory word offensive to my religion, and you're putting it in the title of a law?
That's oppressive.
Woe to thee, Pharisees and scribes, who count your taxes on mint and dill and cumin, but neglect the weightier areas of the law, forgiveness and mercy and compassion.
That other word came from William Randolph Hearst in his Yellow Journalism.
Offensive to my religion is putting in the title of a law.
Just so that politicians could finally come around with a tax and regulating scheme and make everyone stand up and pay their buddies.
Excuse me, if you can't allow us to proceed with the news conference, we're going to have to...
derogatory term that offends my religion in public.
If you were going to say
In Roger Williams' state,
today is Purim.
today is Purim. No more oppression.
I brought Hamantash.
We welcome the press conference.
Are you going to call the Voting Rights Act for black people the N-word Voting Rights Protection Act? How? Woe to thee, Pharisees and scribes, counting thy taxes on mint and dill and cumin.
Are you going to let us continue if we agree to also have you have a press
So you can keep saying the N-word
Can
on the
you just
floor?
say cannabis instead of
That
that?
derogatory term offensive to my
We
religion?
will say cannabis, we will say marijuana, we will say weed, we will say spleef, we will say whatever you want. Okay?
Cannabis.
But
The term that's in the
we
Bible.
insist to
The term that's in the
continue right
Bible.
now.
Will be quiet.
Can we proceed with the press conference without interruption, please?
We're human breeders.
Senator Miller and I believe Rhode Island is ready to take the next step. We have waited and seen long enough to know that the current policy of cannabis prohibition is costly, unfair, and ineffective. Our legislation represents a solution to failed policy. After more than 14 months of allowing adults to purchase cannabis from licensed businesses, the sky is not falling. The sky is not falling in Colorado. In fact, Colorado has one of the fastest growing economies in the country. Roughly 700 million worth of sales took place in Colorado's legal, regulated cannabis market in 2014, which is money that otherwise might have gone into the hands of criminals and drug cartels. Instead of fueling crime and violence, money for cannabis sales in Colorado is now creating good middle-class jobs, boosting the state's economy and putting money into the pockets of working-class families. 4 states have now enacted laws to regulate and tax cannabis, similarly to alcohol. We believe this is the right time for Rhode Island to do the same. Community leaders in Massachusetts are already mobilizing to put cannabis policy reform on the ballot in their state in 2016. Rhode Island has a small window of opportunity to beat Massachusetts to the punch and become the first in New England to take a more sensible approach to cannabis. If we move forward this year, we will not only have a tremendous competitive edge in the regional market, meaning more jobs, more businesses, and more revenue for our state. It also means that we can proudly say that we were among the first states to be on the right side of history when the future generations look back at us. In the ensuing discussion around this proposal, I would urge citizens, my legislative colleagues, to keep an important point in mind. The issue before us is not whether we should condone or condemn cannabis use. The simple truth is that whether legal or illegal people are going to buy, sell, or consume cannabis. The choice we have to make is whether we are going to continue to allow criminals to control the market, or if we are going to put cannabis behind the counters of the licensed businesses and label the products, sell only to adults, and pay taxes. Would we rather have money for cannabis sales going to illicit market, which fuels crime and puts more guns on the street, or do we want those sales to be regulated and taxed so that the money can go to the state where it can be used for better purposes, like improving our schools, substance abuse treatments for people who need it? It would be reckless to continue the current policy of cannabis prohibition when we know it undermines the health and safety of communities and only empowers the profits of illegal drug dealers. A refusal to engage in a discussion about reforming the current cannabis laws is an endorsement of the failed status quo. Today I ask the majority of Rhode Islanders, the majority of Americans who believe cannabis prohibition has done more harm than good, I humbly urge my colleagues in the House to ensure that this bill gets a vote it deserves this year. Thank you. Now, I'll turn it over to my sponsor in the Senate, Senator Josh Schmo.
I have very little to add to that, except that the coalition and the understanding, both as the population of Rhode Islanders and elected officials, has only grown every year, and this year has grown yet again. More people understand not only the justice issues involved in this and the equal justice issues involved in this, the public safety issues involved in this, and the revenue issues involved in this. Me personally, somebody who's been involved in substance abuse and gun control issues, I feel that I want to stop having youth who currently buy marijuana through the illegal process are buying it from somebody who's probably well-armed and just as interested in selling them an opiate, which everybody agrees is much more dangerous than cannabis, marijuana, weed, or anything else that you want to call it. Thank you.
So I just want to take a second, thank you Chairman Miller for those comments. I want to recognize also Representative Regenberg who's joined us today, and also mention that the Minority Leader Brian Newberry in the House wanted to be here today. He's a supporter of this legislation. He regrets that he wasn't able to make it. But our last speaker for today, unfortunately, oh, excuse me, Representative Almeida has joined us as well. Thank you, Representative Almeida, for being here today. So Dr. Daniel Harrop of Providence, a conservative leader and a psychiatrist, unfortunately was in a car accident just before this event. He's not harmed or in trouble, but he was unable to make it today. In his place, we have another coalition member, another doctor, Dr. James Crowley, who's with us today, and he's just going to share a few words that kind of cover the bases that Dr. Harrop was going to cover as well. So please welcome Dr. James Crowley for a few comments.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jared, and thanks for all of you who've turned out for this important press conference. My own interest in the marijuana policy primarily stemmed from criminalization and criminal records for young people who are arrested with small amounts of marijuana. That battle's been won. The second battle is the battle to get this into the hands of patients with a variety of diseases who can greatly benefit from it, in particular terminal cancer patients. So those battles have been won. But there's still a big battle out there because as a doctor, I know that marijuana is not harmless. It's not entirely harmless, but it's far less dangerous than alcohol, tobacco, and many other substances we commonly tolerate in society. That's why it strikes me, and has always struck me since I was educated. I came from a sort of a prohibition kind of background when I was earlier in my career, but as I got educated and I learned more about it, I could see this is fundamentally wrong. It's a tremendous waste of resources for the government to go out and punish adults for using cannabis, which is a much safer substance than alcohol or tobacco by far. Alcohol and tobacco have taken countless lives in this country. Marijuana is difficult to know what, if any, lives have been taken. So today, though, I'm not here really as a doctor, but neither was Dr. Harrop going to be presenting medical issues I just mentioned briefly. But I stand in support of this legislation as a citizen of Rhode Island. I've been a citizen of Rhode Island most of my life. It hasn't ended yet, so I hope to be a citizen a while longer. The question is no longer if marijuana should be regulated and taxed, but it's when. When in this state should it be enacted? Is it going to be after 2 or more other states enact it, or are we going to take the lead? A recent RAND Corporation study on cannabis policy commissioned by the Vermont legislature discusses what it calls the first mover advantage. The idea is simple. Whatever state moves to regulate and tax production and sale of marijuana first will have a significant subsequent competitive edge over neighboring states in the regional market that will develop in the future, as it has in Colorado and other states. Organizers in Massachusetts have already mobilized to put marijuana legislation on the ballot, and current polls indicate the measure will likely pass. That means Rhode Island only has a small window of opportunity to act first. If we don't, once again, we'll fall behind Massachusetts and other New England states and lose a great opportunity, which is now being presented by vigorous advocacy in our state legislature of the gentlemen who have already spoken here and generate that trust and interest in trying to get this substance regulated. Our state needs jobs, and this law will create hundreds, if not thousands, of good middle-class jobs. This is what it's done in Colorado. We heard millions and millions of dollars have come into the state revenue. And it's not just for the people who are retailing it or growing it. It actually spills over to accountants, attorneys, building trades, contractors, lab technicians, garden shops. Our state is continuing to confront a serious budget deficit. And this law would generate tens of millions of dollars for additional funding. Cannabis revenue is already there for the taking. The problem is that under our current policy of cannabis prohibition, revenue is captured entirely by illegal drug dealers who pay no taxes and are basically menaces to society. The bottom line is this: whether legal or illegal, Rhode Islanders are going to buy, sell, and consume marijuana. The question is not whether we want marijuana in this state or not. The question is about when we have it regulated in this state. And are we going to take the lead in New England and demonstrate a leadership role in this whole area, which could persist for years if we do. So, do we want criminal drug dealers controlling the marijuana market as the cannabis market as they do today? I think most people would answer that with negative, just like we don't want to criminalize individuals for small amounts of possessing a substance which is far less dangerous than tobacco or alcohol. So what do we do? I think we should pass this legislation. I think everyone should get behind our legislators who are working so hard to educate the public, and we should join in that effort, and I certainly am going to be one of them. Thank you very much. Is there any questions?
Yes, will the legislators share the bribe money with us?
So you guys have had some time to speak. Are there other folks that have questions?
Are you going to convince the Speaker or the Senate President?
I think this dialogue has transitioned into, like I said, a much wider group of people that are supporting the bill. I think there's probably a majority of senators, and I would challenge potentially a majority of representatives. And we know there are a majority of the citizens of Rhode Island that support the legislation. For some of them, it'll be a justice issue. For others, it'll be a revenue issue. And I think that one of those debates will win the day. And I do think that this might be the year to do that.
If I might just quickly add, I think also part of their platforms has been to create jobs and boost our economy. And this is a proposal that could bring hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs to our state. So I think that's also a crucial piece of the argument.
And both the Speaker, the Senate President, and the Governor have all said that they're open to proposals this year. So we look forward to having a discussion around it.
Have there been one-on-one discussions or discussions between your group and the Senate President and Speaker, particularly on this issue?
I just know that when they have been asked publicly, and you can ask them publicly, that they're open to the discussion.
Is this a fear that Rhode Island could once again, if we don't act now, we could be one of the states last to the table rather than being first to the table?
Absolutely. I think that's another key argument, is that we seem to all agree that this is inevitable, that it's going to happen at some point. And the question is, are we going to allow Massachusetts and other states to move forward while we fall behind? And that's my concern, and that's why I think the coalition here today would urge the legislature to pass the bill this year.
Why can't you just move it from the schedule?
We are taking an approach to regulate marijuana like alcohol, which
But
wouldn't be an
it's not
option
like
just by
alcohol. It
descheduling.
doesn't hurt people like alcohol, does it? It helps them enjoy
Like-
them.
Again, if there are other questions, I think we heard your opinion earlier,
Yes,
so.
okay, there was a share. But I'm with you on that.
Yes?
This is not exactly a question, but I wonder if people had seen the latest Time magazine, which had an article on the NFL and their approach to marijuana. And one of the things I thought was very interesting is they said that there's a federal government patent on marijuana because it does so much to help head injuries and neuropathic kinds of things.
Absolutely. We know that medical marijuana can help people with all sorts of different ailments. And we also know that for folks that don't necessarily use it for medical reasons, it's much less harmful than opiates, prescription drugs, alcohol, tobacco, many of the other things that are commonly used in society, which is, again, part of the hypocrisy of continuing marijuana prohibition.
How has the effects of it being done in states like Colorado and Alaska, what have you guys seen that kind of work so far? And is there anything you could take from that maybe you could switch it up and maybe work differently and more effectively here in the States?
Well, I think overall what we've seen in Colorado is that the system is working very well. They've had, in 2014, over $700 million worth of sales take place in the legal regulated market, and that's money that otherwise might have gone into the hands of drug cartels or illegal dealers. So the fact that they have gotten this program off the ground, the New York Times, the Brookings Institution have all studied what's going on and have deemed it a success. So in a lot of ways we'd like to replicate it, but there are some differences in the tax structure and some of the regulations on edibles we've learned from that experience. But at the same time, the overall idea of regulating marijuana like alcohol has proven to be effective, and we'd like to do the same thing here.
There's always a concern of, especially when there's alcohol, drinking and driving, the tests, breathalyzers, there's ways to do it. And it may be a little more difficult for law enforcement to figure that out if someone may be under the influence while marijuana while driving. Are you guys open to kind of working with law enforcement to try to see if there is a way that can be proven in a relatively quick manner, kind of like how a breathalyzer is?
Well, that's a valid concern, and I would just point out that that issue and that problem is something we have under prohibition currently, and it would perhaps continue to be a problem under the bill that we're proposing. One thing that we are doing to reach out to law enforcement is dedicating 10% of the tax revenue funds for drug recognition expert training, which would help police officers recognize all forms of impairment, not just from alcohol or marijuana, but also prescription medications, from lack of sleep. There's lots of reasons people might be impaired on the road, and this is something that we'd like to dedicate some funding to make our streets safer.
Is the bill identical to last year's, or has it been changed at all?
There are a few differences. The summary document on the table over there outlines some of those changes, but the basic structure is essentially the same.
With alcohol permits for sale in the State House, isn't it a funny timing this week to offer why are we limiting the number of cannabis permits in this bill? Doesn't that set up a situation with artificial scarcity and selling alcohol permits?
This conference is for the press and other advocates. If they want to have a conference for the press, they can do that. So if there are further questions from members of the press, we will be glad to answer. Otherwise, we'd be glad to wrap this up.
I wanted to know if
Are you a member of the press?
I am.
Okay.
I'm from 1000 Watts Magazine.
Okay.
We are the grassroots publication created by patients for patients. And I wanted to know if a percentage of the tax is going to go towards making sure that cancer patients or patients with real debilitating conditions have access to safe and legal quality medicine.
The way that our bill treats the medical marijuana program is it leaves it the way it is, and that's important because we create a different tax structure. We don't think that patients who need medical marijuana for their medical reasons should be taxed at the same rate that someone using marijuana for recreational or their own personal reasons might. So that's one thing that we're doing. We don't dedicate any specific funds for that, but we are hoping that, just like in Colorado, that the prices of medical marijuana will go down as the production scale increases under a tax and regulate model.
We have to make this room available to the House of Representatives, so we would be happy to answer any other questions directly. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you.